Hi, movie monkeys. I'm Ryan Ellis. This is Bev Ellis.
Hi.
Another video for Have You Ever Seen? I don't know what number it is. I've lost track. But we've been on camera every single episode so far this year on the Mondays. We're here to talk about Dangerous Liaisons for a little bit at least. Some corrections. Well, actually, I don't really need these. I got this big thing beneath. I can read the teleprompter beneath. That's why I look down sometimes. I can see it just fine. I probably look better this way, too. Anyway, so we got some Dangerous Liaisons corrections. We've got a couple of suggestions we're going to get to for Black History Month at the end. And in the middle will be, I guess in a way, several movie reviews. And that's going to be the show until you get to the Dangerous Liaisons podcast. Dangerous Liaisons in full. Can you see Glenn close? Found a pretty good picture, I think, for the three of them. Or of the three of them. So happy President's Day if you're American. And happy Family Day if you're Canadian. That is today as we post this on the 20th of February. So the first, corrections to be made. I said John Malkovich had been acting in movies the longest of all these actors, but Glenn Close's first role was in 1983, and his first proper film role was 1984, when he did Places in the Heart and something else. He was nominated for Places in the Heart, I believe. So she was slightly more experienced at making movies than he was, and I made it sound like he'd been acting forever and ever and ever in movies. Maybe he had been on stage, but no, she actually beat him to the punch.
You stand corrected.
I insulted Glenn Close so much. I deeply apologize to Glenn Close.
And all the close heads out there.
Also, Christopher Hampton's 2 Oscars were not 22 years apart. Bad math. They were 32 years apart. That's a long time for anybody, but especially a screenwriter, to go between winning an Oscar and then winning your second Oscar. And his second one may have been even more worthy than the first one, because that was The Father, which is a movie we thought was way better than we even expected it to be.
Yeah, that's an outstanding movie.
Any other thoughts about Dangerous Liaisons before we move on to some other business reviews and such?
Other business, go!
But it was a good movie, and you're going to hear us talk about it for 50-ish minutes in probably 10 minutes. The first review, and actually, this lady just saw this movie. I saw it back in the summer. It was the biggest hit of last year, and I don't think that's going to change. Avatar's got a long way to go to catch it. Top Gun Maverick. Top Gun 2.
Yeah. I had no interest in seeing it when it came out, because I don't like action movies. Don't hate action movies. They're just not my jam. Have no particular affection for the original Top Gun. Saw all the trailers. I was like, you guys have fun. But then it was such a phenomenon. And when it got nominated for Best Picture, I was like, okay, I gotta do it. I gotta see it. And I gotta see it in the theater. Luckily for me, it was still playing in like one screen in Toronto. And the screen it was playing on happened to be playing in, there's a name for this technology where they have the screens on the two sides and you're immersed. You have this whole peripheral vision experience to go.
I think it was called
with,
Cinerama back in the 60s.
Yeah, but it's something different now.
Same idea, though.
Because it's definitely not like a clear picture. It's distorted. It's out of focus. It's really just meant to put you more like in the space. They instruct you to look at the center of the screen. It's maybe 20% of the film that even takes advantage of this technology. Okay. Most of the time, it's just the regular screen.
You mean John Hamm is not surrounding you whenever he's on screen?
If
I could live with that.
Then give this movie all the awards. From a girl who does not like action movies and does not care about Top Gun, that movie is exceptional. It is so much fun. It is so refreshing to see an action movie with all those practical effects where it didn't feel like you were watching a video game or a cartoon. You could feel the G-force in their face. You could feel the planes coming up and all over them. I loved it. It was great. It was exhilarating. I left the theater in the most fantastic mood. It is exactly what you want an experience like that to be. And I'm so happy that that movie made $2 billion.
I don't think it was that much, but it was a lot.
Billions of dollars, a lot of money. I am thrilled that this is the movie that made it.
I'm a huge fan of the original movie. I've seen it many times. I know it's Navy propaganda and everything.
Oh, yeah.
But I was 12 when it came out, and I think I saw it within the year it came out, probably on VHS, I guess, back in those days. I was, 13 then when I saw it the first time. I've seen that movie probably more than almost anything else in the 80s, and I've seen a lot of, well, not Back to the Future.
Wow.
But I've seen it so many times. The sequel, I only saw that one time. I will definitely watch it again. And it was a terrific film. Do you think it's worthy of the Best Picture nomination? And what's a pretty good field this year? Better than last year's field.
I mean, it's worthy of the nomination. It's not going to win. It shouldn't win.
Steven Spielberg and Tom Cruise, wherever the award show was recently, I think it was an award show, you can overhear Spielberg saying to Cruise, "Your movie saves cinema's ass." And Avatar 2, we didn't mention that, but they made people want to go back to the theater because so many other things didn't. Spielberg's own film, which you hope to see tomorrow. We're recording this on the Friday before it goes up. So what is it, the 16th today? 17th today. We want to see Fabelmans finally. It'll be on demand, though. The only place we can see it is some crappy-ass VIP screen at a theater downtown that we've gone to before. Someone told me they're not any better than when we saw a movie there. We would like to see the Fabelmans on the big screen, and we can't do it. So it's ironic he said that to Cruise because his own movie, Steven Spielberg, last I looked, was at $17 million only.
And that never got a wide release. There's a lot of crazy things happening in the theater, and I mean the movie theater industry right now. Forget the movie industry, that's one half of that beast, but just movie theaters and the types of pictures that are making money right now. I don't envy anybody trying to predict what's going to happen and how things are going to go. But it is true that Top Gun and Avatar 2 are movies that you have to see in the theater and that deserve a theatrical experience. I have lots of feelings. I also have lots of feelings about the fact that it got nominated for screenplay, but I think I'm going to save them for our Oscars preview episode podcast.
A couple weeks away from now. Mm-hmm. But Top Gun, big thumbs up from Bev. And when I saw it back in the summer, big thumbs up from me. Next movie we saw on demand, Marcel the Shell with Shoes On. Charm personified. Jenny Slade's voice is perfect for this character. And she's done other voiceover roles. And she was either fine or maybe even a little bit annoying. Probably bad design. But she is note perfect for this. And she's playing a male character. I like that notion, although it's a shell. But it is Marcel, so logically that's a male. Ooh, wait,
it's a male shell.
I will not have your non-binary stuff with shells, Bev. Anyway, I didn't dwell on it that much, but she does a great job with it. I didn't love the movie, but I definitely liked it. But her voice is a 12 out of 10 for this. It's outstanding.
So I loved the movie. I think it might make my top 5 of the year. And it definitely would be my vote for Best Animated Film of the Year that I've seen. To be fair, I haven't seen all the nominees. I think this is just the third one that I've seen. But I thought it was a unique and special film with a wonderful, refreshing voice and an exceptional script. It had so much heart and economy of storytelling, genuinely funny. And when you talk about her voice performance, she improvised a lot of it. She was writing the screenplay as she's doing the voice performance. She is so talented. That movie is just wonderful. I'm so glad that it exists.
And it's up for the animated Oscar against Turning Red, Puss in Boots, Pinocchio, Del Toro's Pinocchio, and I think The Sea Beast. So I've seen most of them. Haven't seen Puss in Boots yet. I also saw, Bev didn't, Inarritu's Bardo, and that other part of the title, it's a longer title, and Sam Mendes' Empire of Light. Bardo is on Netflix and Empire of Light's on Disney+. I didn't love either of them, but Bardo is at least creative. Very creative, in fact. Empire is mostly bland. Although Olivia Colman is maybe not quite Oscar-worthy yet again, but rock solid. She's such a good actress. She does a good job with this. The only nomination either movie got was for its cinematography. They both got that, and that's it. That's why I watched them both. They look good. You've got Roger Deakins doing Empire of Light, and you've got Darius Khondji doing Bardo, but they've done better work. And the reason I bring this up is because, A, I did see them. They're Oscar nominees, and we've been talking about those a lot the last few weeks. But the bigger reason is because, I'm going to say it again, Till, we've been talking about Danielle Deadwyler so much and her performance being excluded, but the cinematography, and I guess even the sets in that movie, beautiful looking movie. The colors pop in Till so much. During it, I said the cinematography for this movie should be nominated, and of course nothing from Till was. And these other two movies are fine. You didn't see them, so you can't really comment.
No, but it does seem striking to me that these are all very safe choices for
We love Deakins, but he's won twice. He's been nominated so many times. Empire of Light, if I had just seen the movie randomly and didn't know anything about Oscar nominations, I wouldn't have thought, yes, that has to be up for its look.
And he won for the right movies, too.
Yeah.
Blade Runner 2049 and 1917 are both absolute works of art and the right movies for him to win for.
Yeah. Bobby Bukowski, by the way, the cinematographer on Till. Okay, next thing is Black History Month recommendations. Well, Black History Month is in February, so we're making recommendations of black films this month. We've done a few already. I guess it's been 2 weeks of it. Now week number 3. Mine is Badass, or How to Get the Man's Foot Out of Your Ass. A movie that you saw and I think you liked, but I loved it the first time I saw it. I loved it every time since. It's a movie about movies. You know I'm going to like that.
Your favorite, yeah.
Mario Van Peebles is a better actor than his father was that I've ever seen. I've seen Sweetback's Badass Song, which his father made, and maybe 1 or 2 other things that Melvin's been in. But I think Mario's a better actor, playing his own dad. What I love so much is his performance, first of all, in the lead role. But also, I love the sense of camaraderie with all the actors. There's a lot of fun. There's some good comedy in it, too. Rainn Wilson's in that, and Joy Bryant, I think is her name. And really good actors across the board. Adam West has a pretty fun cameo. And the finale at the Sweetback premiere is one of the most outstanding and satisfying endings I've seen in any movie.
And true story.
Yeah, it actually happened.
Yeah.
I won't give it away if you haven't seen it, but I do recommend BAADAS, I think 5 S's. So Badass. Because it is based on Sweetback's Badass song, his father's film from 1971, a huge hit. Badass didn't do very well. Mario's movie didn't do well at all. I saw it on DVD, and it's one of those that I wished I'd seen on the big screen because I just enjoyed it so much.
All right, so my recommendation for Black History Month is another documentary. I chose Paris is Burning last week. This week I'm choosing I Am Not Your Negro, the movie about James Baldwin. When did it come out? 2019?
No, 2017 or 16 maybe?
Yeah, I think it lost the Oscar to the O.J. Simpson documentary.
That makes sense.
Also, really highly recommend. That was an incredible picture. Like, I can't be mad about that choice. But for Black History Month, I think that the James Baldwin doc, I'm Not Your Negro, is a perfect choice. This film isn't really going out of its way to give us a history lesson or teach us about James Baldwin's life story and why we should exalt him. Instead, it just really lets Baldwin speak for himself. It lets you just bathe in his intellect and his boldness and the catharsis of his anger, which I found really refreshing. And maybe anger is the wrong word because he never comes across as angry exactly, just ruthlessly honest in his observations. He wasn't someone who was trying to win hearts and minds. He was someone who was just naming and describing injustice, and he really didn't care if he made his oppressor uncomfortable. And it's exhilarating. Even the parts that made me uncomfortable, they ought to make me uncomfortable. And maybe it's especially those moments that I find exhilarating about that movie. Also, it's only 95 minutes long, and it's available for free on Canopy.
That's where it is. I was looking up earlier to see where to find Badass, and I forgot to look up where to see that one. But that's that's right. It's on Canopy. But that is a pretty solid documentary. I saw it too. Don't remember it as well as you do. Didn't love it the way you do, but I recommend it myself also. In addition to, and so on. Hey, another on-screen beverage.
Cheers.
A toasting.
It's just water, but it's sparkling, so.
Friday night. Party time. Okay, then we'll wrap by saying the next thing we're going to cover is Badlands. That'll be on February the 27th. And we'll do an on-screen video, on-camera video. We keep on doing these. Why not do another one? But thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe and share and follow and tell your friends all that stuff. Help us grow the channel. You found it, obviously, but it's at HYESLS. That'll take you to our main page of videos, and we're up to double digits by now. But as we go out here, we're going to be talking about that movie behind us, Dangerous Liaisons. 50 minutes worth of chat about Stephen Frears' movie about really bad people. Say goodbye,
Deliciously
Bev.
bad people. Bye, Bev.
Dangerous Liaisons. I don't know what that means. If you're the kind of person who would hatch a fiendish plot to ruin people just because you can, well, we don't want any part of you. Stop listening and go get some therapy or something. For those still listening, let's do some promoting. Sparkplug Coffee offers fairly traded premium Arabica beans that are the freshest in Canada. They've got a wide variety of blends and roasts. They even have a rotating seasonal blend. If you prefer your steaming cups to be instead filled with half calf or decaf, you can certainly go with either of those options. Orders will be shipped within 1 week to customers in Canada or the United States of America. And if you're like us and make your residence in Canada, the delivery won't cost you a thing. French people, as in from France, sorry, you're out of the loop here. I'm going to assume some of those virtuosos of deceit didn't take my advice and they're still listening right now. So you weirdos, focus on what I'm saying. And you normal people should focus too. You need to be a Sparkplug member. Need to get perks and deals that others don't get. That way, you save dollars, or francs, euros, on every single order. You can customize too to get the coffee when you need it, and you can pause or cancel anytime. And don't let the words coffee of the month, coffee de la month, get anywhere near your dastardly lips. If they do, wipe them off like so much makeup as you look sadly into a mirror. So go to sparkplug.coffee/HYES. That HYES promo code will save you 20% off your next order. It's time right now, Zutalor, to stop messing with the Michelles and the Umas of the world and do something productive with your stupid life. And that's spending money on our sponsor. Now, Andrew Luther, I know it's not beyond your control to plunk some keys on your keyboard to play us into this podcast, so s'il vous plaît, do that now.
And action. ever seen.
Dangerous Liaisons. Bonjour, mes amis, and merci beaucoup for your download of the 493rd installment of the Classic Movies podcast now known as Have You Ever Seen? And I've now spoken French more than anybody in this movie does in the first few seconds. We've been spoiling movie greats for going on 10 years, although most of that time was spent with us calling ourselves the Top 100 Project. So scroll back on your device to see the hundreds of films we have discussed because you're bound to find quite a few you'd like to hear about. I'm the hissing jerkface, who's always had a huge crush on Michelle Pfeiffer, but I don't get to be with her like John Malkovich did. Ryan Ellis. And here's the woman who fans herself incessantly, but would never be cast in a movie about French people because she's no more French than any of the actors in this movie are. My wife, the Marquise Bev.
That's me, and I'll have you know, I have a French-Canadian grandmother.
Oh, damn, you're in my theme. Well, not French as in from France.
No, Acadian, the least French-Canadian you can be.
Bev, can you imagine yourself and your boobs in these corsets?
Oh my god! I wouldn't be able to enter rooms. Like, I don't know what would happen.
Here come the boobs, and 2 minutes later, there's Bev.
Speaking of which, Glenn Close only had those great knockers because she was 7 weeks past giving birth.
Oh, really?
Yeah. She had just weaned her baby, so she was like, look how good my tits look in these costumes.
Well, also, they were being pushed up so much. We do see Uma Thurman flat out naked, and I don't think we ever have before or since, right? She was 18, so probably not before.
Well, you mentioned that she regretted agreeing to do nudity, so maybe she was young and she decided to do it and then later was like, that was a mistake and just never did it again.
But she does look very good naked. We don't see anybody else, I don't think, of the major cast at least naked. We see other people, but not the major cast members. Okay, we'll talk all about the cast in a minute here because that's why this movie exists. It's for the acting. Well, I guess the design, too. It did win Oscars. So the coming attractions trivia question for Dangerous Liaisons. And if you're a fan of Friends, you know this before I even finished reading it. We find out during my favorite episode of Friends, the one where they gamble for the apartment, that's not even a word, that Rachel says her favorite movie is Dangerous Liaisons. Joey correctly answers the question that her actual favorite movie is...
Weekend at Bernie's!
I love that moment. And no matter which one, Rachel thought movies peaked in those 2 years of 1988 and 1989.
Well, I haven't seen Weekend at Bernie's in a while, so maybe she's right.
In fairness, I enjoy Weekend at Bernie's too. The sequence when the dead Bernie, of course he's dead through most of the movie, is being dragged along behind the boat and is hitting all the buoys. I remember my mom and I laughed our asses off at that. I don't know when it was, probably the early 90s on tape. VHS, kids. Okay, Les Liaisons Dangereuses was released by Warner Brothers just in time to qualify for the Oscars 35 years ago on December 21st, 1988. The film did all right. It grossed more than twice its budget worldwide. Remind us what it's about, please, and give us the skinny on Dangerous Liaisons.
Glenn Close and John Malkovich are the Marquise de Merteuil and Vicomte de Valmont, high-ranking aristocrats in pre-revolutionary France. Petty, vain, and idle, they spend their time having love affairs with whomever they please. Seeking a challenge, Valmont pursues Michelle Pfeiffer's Madame de Tourvel, a happily married woman with a pristine reputation. And, seeking revenge, Merteuil connives to spoil the virtue of her cousin's virginal daughter, who is betrothed to her ex-lover. When Valmont inadvertently falls in love with Madame de Tourvel, Merteuil can't stand it, and the two turn on each other, destroying one another quickly and mercilessly.
Or, in a nutshell, the cruelty is the point.
Yes.
People said that about the Trump administration. Fits these people, too.
They're both very bad. Glenn Close's character, in particular, Merteuil, she is a sadist.
Yeah, Malkovich's character, Valmont, we see a lot of humanity in him, of course. Not really in her. Well, humanity in the sense of breaking down when she has true regret what she did, but not through the whole scheme. He had regret through the scheme.
Regret that she got caught. Not regret for anything she did.
And then losing
regret for what is going to happen to her. Yeah.
She breaks down.
Oh, that's true. She's very upset when she finds out that he's dead. That's true.
I have another nutshell, by the way. Mm-hmm. You should want a bored bitch like this, huh? I think I said that when the movie was over, didn't I? She's so bored, nothing to do. Let me ruin people because I'm a fucking asshole. Well, we've already sworn early on, so I guess this gets an E. Okay, the Rotten Tomatoes numbers on this movie are great, especially the critics. 94% of them like the film. 7.7 out of 10 is the average. There are 33 reviews on the site. 83% of audiences, still pretty solid. That's a, A- if you're in school, something like that. It was 32nd at the 1988 U.S. box office. Rain Man, a competitor for Best Picture, was number 1. Big was number 4. Die Hard was number 7. And A Fish Called Wanda was 12th. We've covered all of those and a lot more from 1988. We'll cover more probably before the year's over. This film won 3 Oscars. The adapted screenplay by Christopher Hampton, the sets and the costumes. It was nominated for Best Picture. Also Glenn Close for Best Actress, one of her 8 nominations and no wins. Michelle Pfeiffer for Best Supporting Actress, and George Fenton's music score. And incidentally, by the way, we're recording this on Groundhog Day, and I happened to watch Groundhog Day, because why not? A couple of hours ago. And
I'm your weatherman.
Did the score for that movie, and also co-wrote the song with Harold Ramis.
That song's so bad.
I'm your weatherman. Yeah, so all those nominations and 3 wins. Now, by the way, I watched the Oscar speeches. When the movie won for its sets, the guy was gracious, acknowledged the other movies that were nominated, then quickly left. I think he even went back to his seat, although you're supposed to go back to talk to the press. And what was it? Gene Hackman and Willem Dafoe? You see them gesturing almost like, no, go this way. And then the video cut off. I think it was supposed to be that they're saying, dude, come this way. But he'd already gone back to his seat, or was trying to at least. That was pretty cute, I thought. The costume designer was more loquacious and thanked a bunch of people, including the actresses, for putting up with these corsets. And Christopher Hampton received his Oscar for the script from, ironically, Michelle Pfeiffer, who co-presented with Dennis Quaid. Hampton's speech was pretty charming, and he managed to thank all the relevant people without droning on the way some people do. He was also, I think, the most worthy winner of the 5 scripts in that category, particularly for the dialogue.
Agreed. Yeah, the dialogue is quite beautiful, a real highlight of the film. And speaking of costumes, another detail about Glenn Close being 7 weeks past childbirth. She said that that corset was so tight on her that she had welts when she took it off every night. And she had actually intended to continue breastfeeding. Her baby was with her. But she was like, it would have taken an hour and a half to get in and out of that costume. Not even counting feeding her baby. So she had to wean her kid.
I can buy that when they're being pushed up and squeezed like that. This may sound stupid, but it is a comparison. It is a reference point for me, which is when I take off some of my tight socks, you can see the indentation on my leg. That's nothing compared to a corset. That's a sock. But look what that does. Obviously, when they're wearing these for as long as I was wearing my socks for the day, they have an even worse problem than I do.
I gotta tell you.
Not that it's a problem for me. I'm just saying.
I know. As somebody
I'll
who
get by.
Has to wear some pretty architectural bras, let's say.
Cantilevered?
They need flying buttresses. My big old juggalugs. I will have big red marks from those underwires at the end of the day. Taking off my bras. Total chef's kiss moment. But then not wearing a bra can be uncomfortable too when your boobs are this big. Anyways, enough about my boobs. There is one shot I'll call your attention to, which is near the beginning when we were introduced to Glenn Close's character. She's sitting, she's looking in the mirror. The very first shot of the movie is
the first shot of the movie is looking in the mirror, and so is the last.
Yeah, so it's a nice bookend. But when they show the wide shot of her body, you may think, oh, she's sitting in such an odd way. Her legs are quite to the side, and she's cross-legged. And apparently it was because the costume designer was like, the shoes! Everyone has to see the shoes! He was so proud of these costumes, and that he was a little distressed because Stephen Frears, the director, in the beginning, there are these beautiful wide shots. You see the set, you see the costumes, but as the film goes on, he gets closer and closer and closer, and the costume designer was distressed because he's like, they're wearing these beautiful dresses, you've got to show them. But you couldn't really see them at the end.
Because the story's about their close-ups and their faces, I guess.
Kind of something about this film that makes it stand out as a costume drama, that it doesn't feel like it's just showing the costumes and the sets. A lot of costume dramas make a little bit too big of a deal of everything that they're putting in front of the camera. This feels like a movie that happens to take place in this time and place in this culture, but isn't trying to turn
show
it
off.
into eye candy. Yeah, that's not the point, really.
Well, when the idle rich, they've got time to do this kind of stuff, and that opening montage that does show her looking into the mirror also shows all of them getting ready for the day, I guess.
With the team.
Exactly, and Malkovich has that thing over his face so they can powder his wig. That could be a horror movie type of thing he has on. In fact,
looks like a plague mask.
Wasn't there one of the Netflix shows? Wasn't it one of the Mike Flanagan shows where there's a character? It might be The Haunting of Bly Manor, something like that.
I think that was plague masks.
Okay.
That's
not what he's holding. It's more of a cone thing, so
Yeah.
he keeps the stuff out of his eyes, and then it just sprays on property. You've seen that with makeup in the modern era, even. People have a thing that goes along their hairline for hairspray, I guess, more specifically. But anyway, yeah, so even Malkovich is part of this whole preening deal.
Vanity is such a big part of this film, a big theme of this film. These two characters, vanity is their sin. It's a beautiful bit of visual storytelling at the beginning there when we're being introduced to our two main characters while they're expressing vanity and putting on their costume, which you could also say is like their armor that they go out to enter the world in. Of course, they don't have to lift a finger. This is how bored they are. They don't even have to dress themselves. They don't have jobs. They don't even have to lift a finger to do their hair or their makeup or dressing.
Some of those things would require help, whether you want to do it yourself or not.
Okay, sure. But there's the shot of Malkovich putting his hand out from his bed and grabbing the hot towel, shaking it out, and then putting it under the covers. This is how he has to be woken up. He's so very spoiled. But the big difference is that with her, you immediately see her face. It's the first shot of the movie. She's looking in the mirror. She's making an expression. That is part of her armor. She has to have this placid face. She has to have this visage that even her ladies in waiting have to believe. Him, on the other hand, we do not see his face until the very end when the whole presentation is complete.
Right. The production design that won, Stuart Craig won that. And art direction, actually, did he share this? I guess he must have, with Gavin Bouquet and Gerard Viard. Set decoration by Gerard James, and the costumes are James Aitchison. And the funny thing, too, is that the top-billed actor in the film, and probably the biggest name going to it, is Glenn Close. And she's very good in this movie. But she's not in it that much for a Best Actress nominee. This movie belongs to John Malkovich, and he wasn't nominated. Pfeiffer and Close were. Uma Thurman was 18, so she was new to movies, obviously. Keanu wasn't that well known yet, doing an accent, ill-advised yet again. Because does anybody else really do an accent? I don't think any of the major cast members are European. So not only are they not French, but they're not even that typical, you're
British
English,
accent, yeah.
So then you sound like you're German or you're French or whatever the thing is, to sound different from what Americans are used to hearing, which they still did in the late 80s. Keanu's doing an accent that no one else is really doing in this entire movie, which is funny casting. But back to the point of the two main stars, who I think are both very good. But this movie is Malkovich's, and Close is not in it that much. She's so good when she is in it, and I'm not criticizing that, but I didn't remember that from having seen this a few times, but it's been a long time, that Close is really truly a supporting player, and this movie is John Malkovich, and what a weird bit of casting that is.
Yeah, I don't know how I feel about him being cast as Valmont. It's a choice to make Valmont creepy. He is a creep.
But how does he get all these women then?
Well, that's the thing. They say conspicuously in one of the first scenes, oh, he's so charming. Is he? I don't really see him being charming. I see him being pushy.
Yeah.
I see him being intimidating. There's a sexiness kind of bad boy thing about him. But I would never describe his character as he plays it as charming. He plays it like John Malkovich, which is to say I don't think he could have done it a different way.
I loved his performance, and at the same point he's miscast.
Yeah.
Alan Rickman
agreed.
played this on the stage. Rickman had, well, it was that year. Die Hard was his first ever movie. And they didn't want a non-star to be in this movie. They probably thought the same thing that I'm saying right now, which is, yeah, Glenn Close. Michelle Pfeiffer was, I think, known at that point. She must have been.
Yeah.
Uma and Keanu weren't so much. Some of the supporting players we'll talk about a little later. Maybe they were somewhat well-known. But this belongs to those 4 or 5 main people. But this one guy's got to carry the whole film. So let's get somebody who's already pretty well-known. An Oscar nominee, at least once at that point, I believe he'd been nominated. Rickman was unknown to American audiences. He hadn't been in a movie at all yet. But the other person that would have been perfect in this movie, and he just started acting at this point, but this is more retrospect because of what we know about him now, Kevin Spacey would have been awesome in this. Because don't forget, the baggage he brings would make him better in this than he would have been before the baggage.
I have no comment.
Just picture what he's doing in this movie. It's all about manipulation and lying and taking advantage, especially of younger people. Well,
Considering you do have to sympathize with him, not to say that you can't sympathize with any human, but the arc that he goes through is the beauty of the film.
Yeah.
The reason why he is, as you say, the main person in the film, because he actually changes.
He has the
Although
arc.
I don't think he does the most convincing job. He tells us he's in love with Madame de Torvet.
Torvel.
I just don't feel like I see it exactly until he's very upset at the end. But when they're together, I don't know. I just don't see them in love. Her falling in love with him also isn't terribly convincing. Maybe the biggest flaw in the film for me, because it's such a turning point.
her meaning Torvel, not...
Torvel, yeah. Go ahead and picture the alternate casting, because Milos Forman did his own version of this film. Well, I should say this story. He called it Valmont.
The next year.
And I think it was Colin Firth that played Valmont.
It was a complete dud, too. It failed so badly.
Yeah, and Annette Bening played the Glenn Close part.
Really? She was still so new to movies.
I guess, yeah.
I think.
Firuza Balk was Uma Thurman's part. I can't remember who played Madame de Torvel.
I like the Firth casting, but the rest of it I don't think is better than what they do here.
But Firth is such a different actor from Malkovich. You can't help but like Colin Firth. He could just play an absolute cad, and you're going to root for him. He has this lovability. He has this vulnerability. whereas you would say the opposite about Malkovich. Malkovich has this menace about him. Even when he's playing a good guy, there's just something menacing, just naturally menacing about him.
Hanging around.
Oh my God.
It's funny, too, that I mentioned Rounders doing that right there, where he does an accent that people have since said is pretty accurate to the way a lot of Russians can sound. The people that he studied apparently sound like that. It'd be almost like if you're doing an English accent, but you do that Cockney thing, and then somebody says, that's not accurate. Yeah, but to Cockney people, it is. But he's here in a movie where he's supposed to be French and doesn't even try, none of them do, as I said before, maybe Keanu, to sound French.
But it must be a decision that Frears made. Just do your American accents. Did it bother you? I've never even
No,
really
I'm bringing it up because I was looking through a few hours ago and thinking it is funny that these very good actors, and some of them went on to some great careers, they relatively new. Most of them, other than Close, were, and she wasn't exactly a 10-year veteran of acting. It had been 5 years she'd been acting in Hollywood. Malkovich had been around the longest, I guess, of all the major cast members. But we have such baggage with them now, so many great performances, such a big career. Keanu obviously is the biggest name now. And yet you look at this, and it must be Frears' choice, you're right, where they're not even trying to do the thing that people usually do in these movies that are set in France or England or Russia or wherever the place is, sounding like the people that they're supposed to be. You always get that from actors. I got to get inside the character, but you're not even remotely close to sounding like the character. That's why I bring it up.
I think this movie makes the case that the British accent is unnecessary to prove you're in Europe.
Well, okay. Okay, so back to the plot. I didn't finish that. The AFI noms, there were 3 of them. Didn't make any of the list, though. The top 100 passions, that makes a lot of sense. The top 50 villains, the Marquise, although you could have put, I guess, Valmont in there, too, but it's really more her. It is her plan. And the 1998 AFI top 100 lists. So it was recognized the first time with a nomination, but not the second time. Now, obviously, like the movie, we've been talking for a long time. We're way past opening thoughts, but if you have them, you might as well send them now.
Okay.
Say them now.
I'm going to say there were probably a few years when I was younger that I may have described this as my favorite film. Not even second to Weekend at Bernie's. I think this was at least in my top 3 for a number of years. I have more quibbles with it now, mostly that I wish I was more emotionally invested in the relationship between Madame de Torval and Valmont. There's such rich tragedy there, and it feels more like an intellectual exercise than an emotional one. But it makes up for it by giving us this great cinema villain with Glenn Close's Marquis de Martreuil, and the whole film is just so delicious. It's gorgeous people in beautiful clothes and decadent rooms being just the pettiest. So I do love it.
It reminds me a lot of Succession. I'm going to have a hard time watching that this year because I said it to you when Succession ended, whenever that was, a couple years ago. I respect the hell out of the people that made that show, or make that show. And the actors, of course, are all fantastic. But I really, and you said this about the guy in Whale Rider, the grandfather, and you had a reason to say this, but I have more reason to say that about Brian Cox's character. I hate him. I loathe this motherfucker, not Cox, the character, so much that I want to go through the screen. I'm sure I'm going to say this more this coming season, and strangle him. And if I have to go down for killing this motherfucker, I'll go down for killing this motherfucker. Well, what we're watching here is the same kind of thing. Great dialogue, really good actors doing a great job of it, but I fucking hate these people for what they're doing. And
Do you hate Valmont? Obviously, you hate
the difference is that he has humanity. The most human character in Succession is probably the one that's also the most irritating, I guess. Maybe it's the actor, the character as well, and that's Kendall. The rest of them are not really human. Roman's so popular, but he's not really that much of a human being most of the time. Kendall has so many flaws, and he actually acknowledges them. We see him showing remorse for things he's done. And this movie is very similar where, okay, and the difference here is we've got 3 people. Well, I don't really know why Uma, she's so young, but Cecile, who she plays, does go over to the dark side. But then she's such a kid. That's really on Valmont for doing that. You cannot blame Chevalier. He's a good guy.
Also a puppy. They're just little. They're just so naive. It's almost too much, to be honest. Both of their performances are bad. They are actors who have been very good in other things. Her more than him. I love Keanu, but I would never say he's like a great thespian. But neither of them are great in this movie.
Well, we just said Close and Malkovich are assholes, so that leaves Pfeiffer. Now, why do you think, and I love Pfeiffer, and I think she's very good in the film, why do you think Pfeiffer, why do you think Torval, a married woman, sleeps with him?
Question is, why does she fall in love with him? Because she falls in love with him before she ever gives in physically to him.
Right.
I don't buy it. It just feels like it wasn't earned. He is such a jerk to her always. But then you might say he's a pickup artist. He's pressuring her. It's not like, oh, I like you so much, why don't you like me back?
Which is what Keanu would do.
If you don't like me back, then I'm mad at you. And that is the thing that is working on her.
If he played like Chevalier, then it would be annoying. You notice how Keanu and Uma, who are supposed to be betrothed, I think, right?
They can't get married because he's broke and she's rich. Okay. She is engaged to this other character
we don't see,
who we
right?
never see. In Valmont, we actually do meet her fiancé, and he's just like a stuffy older guy who insists that she has a convent education, that she be a virgin, which is why it's such a scandal that they get her to sleep with not just Valmont, but with Chevalier, so that when she goes to her marriage bed, she'll be trained to perform things that he would hesitate to ask a professional for. You can kind of assume that among all the things that they do that hurt people in this movie, her reputation, certainly her marriage, will be ruined. Any chance that she might have had a happy marriage is spoiled by them manipulating her and messing with her, all for the sake of getting revenge.
And she gets pregnant, too.
Yeah, she has
a miscarriage.
She has a miscarriage, yeah. The lack of care that they take with her as a person, we should be more upset, but then they make her character enough of a cartoon that you don't really worry about her that much.
Partly because...
she's ultimately into it, yeah.
Marquise convinces her.
Why don't you just take him as a lover? He can teach you how to be a good wife.
Well, you do see the bookend scene, too. Not so much bookend, I guess. The literal bookend of the opening and closing is Glenn Close looking in the mirror. But an early time and then a later time with people writing letters on people's backs. First, it's Malkovich doing it on the back of...
She's a courtesan. She's a working girl.
Right. And then later on, it's Malkovich who's got the naked back, and it's Uma Thurman doing it, writing a letter on his back. So they definitely corrupted her, and that's what Marquise wanted, even though, of course, Valmont wanted to corrupt Torvel. But they want to be together. She obviously always wanted him. She admits it. The language is so florid. I wanted to watch a scene earlier to see how they pronounce their names, so I'm not going to say the Martu part because I just watched it.
I looked it up. I watched a pronunciation
I couldn't find one. So I'll go with Marquise. But in looking it up, I found the scene where there are so many great quotes, and they're almost all, well, they are all Glenn Close's quotes.
She gets all the best lines.
She says, like most intellectuals, Chevalier is intensely stupid. She says, I learned to dominate your sex and avenge my own. I already said this in the coffee sponsor. She became a virtuoso of deceit because she felt like she was manipulated by the system. She had to be the dutiful housewife. This movie actually probably ages well. Some things don't, I'm sure, but this aspect for a lot of women would be like, yeah, we got our turn and this is our avatar. The Marquise in this movie to say... Oh,
God, is that our avatar?
Well, it's not a good thing, I guess.
I know there's got to be some women out there that would thrill in the...
They're very vocal on Twitter.
Yeah.
But also she has a line about win or die.
Well, win or die, isn't that the point of the movie? That's how she ends that glorious speech. Two of those quotes are from that very speech where he asks her, how did you ever create this persona? How do you actually appear to be one person while you're actually another? The way she describes it is essentially the blueprint of a sociopath. She's like, I watched other people, I watched how they behaved, and I learned how to appear exactly how they needed me to be so that I could get away with everything I want to get away with. But what she wants to get away with is sadism, this sheer cruelty. But when it comes down to it, when she says the actual point is, I have to win or die, because her situation is so precarious as a woman that if she doesn't destroy her enemies, she is done for. And that is what happens at the end of the film. She does destroy Valmont, but with his last breath, he destroys her right back. And she gets booed at the opera house, and then what becomes of her? Although I like to think she's shunned from Paris. She leaves, she goes somewhere else to start anew, and then she is the only one that survives the French Revolution that is going to behead all of these aristocratic assholes in about 7 years. Because I assume the movie takes place when the original book was published, because this is based on a novel that was published in France in 1782. Just 7 years before the French Revolution. So you have to wonder if novels like this were either a reflection of the disgust the public felt for the aristocracy, or a thumb on the scale maybe of public opinion that helped lead to the revolution. I think we're probably seeing works of art now that are very anti-capitalist, that are vilifying the billionaire class who may not have all the same predilections as the aristocrats in France. They certainly aren't bored. They're very busy trying to make themselves as rich as possible no matter what happens to the rest of us. But you can definitely see public opinion turning on them the same way that this is a piece of art that reflects the way public opinion was turning on the aristocracy in France. Look how vile they are. Just look at the way they are such pointless human beings that use their time and their money to just
hurt people.
Hurt people. They don't do any good in the world unless it's for show. because he pretends to help the poor in this village only so that he can win over Madame de Tourvel. They're terrible people who do not deserve their privilege. So it's interesting that this was a genuine artifact of the dissatisfaction of France with their aristocrats at
Why
the
they
time.
revolted, yeah.
Yeah, and the book was published just 7 years before the Revolution. So these people, if they really did live, would really have had their heads cut off in a guillotine just a short 7 years later.
So what happens next then? Well, I think Marquise...
Guillotine!
She moves somewhere else in France to be around people who don't know her and hate her. Or she doubles down on being a bad bitch and finds another pawn she can use to mess with people's lives. And that's the part I didn't have in my notes here, but I'll add it now. You just said it. I'll steal it from you. She dies too, because if she's still there, she's probably going to.
All those pretty wigs are going to end up in a basket. And I should add, with all the boredom and all the cruelty, they don't even seem like they're having fun. They seem like they're desperately running away from the emptiness of their lives. So they have to fill that gaping void with their machinations. But it's really more of a way of escaping the boredom of their lives.
Yeah, because Malkovich and Close in their scenes together are so much fun together. But yeah, it almost seems like I'm convincing myself that this is awesome and it's cool and I'm going to get you. And she always wanted him back, but she won't really acknowledge that most of the time. He's often saying that he's doing this to get to be with her. He's got a proof of the letter from Madame de Tourvel that they slept together. But here's something that doesn't age well at all. And again, the movie's 35 years old, but we'll bring it up. It's when Valmont has Cecile's key and forces himself on her. So he gets in there in the first place, which people say is so inappropriate. And of course it is. But this is a bad guy. I guess we'd call it rape now. You wouldn't have called it that back then, partly because she does acquiesce. And then, as the movie plays out, she's been with him many times. It's his baby that's miscarried. So I don't think she has that many regrets about some of that. Maybe she would later down the road, but at that time, she was enjoying herself. But he did force himself on her in the first place.
She's a fictional character, written by a man, screenplay by a man, director was a man. She was an 18-year-old actress that probably wouldn't have had the wisdom or the inclination or the authority to speak up to say one thing or another about the way her character was, and it was made in the 80s.
It also doesn't entirely track, though, because although you could argue it has different approaches for different women, because with Tourvel, it is way more of a seduction, I guess. He never forced himself on her. When she's ready to do it, he pulls away, and the camera shows a shot of him. She doesn't see his face, so he's not acting for her. He's not putting this on. He's doing it for the sake of what we're seeing, and it's legitimate, I think, which is he feels guilt. Mm-hmm. And then she really feels guilt because she was ready to cheat on her husband with this guy and would have, but he's the one that pulled back. Then later on, they actually do it. He says to Marquise, he won't be merciful next time. And he isn't. But then it looks like it was an awesome situation. So at that time, Tourvel is not regretting anything. But then he comes back to Marquise and says, success!
Very first thing he does is take his conquest back to the Marquise and try to collect his prize.
But you agree with me, though, that you can see in his face at least twice where he doesn't feel good about this at all.
He even admits to her when he's telling the story, I resisted, and it was because I actually found it hard to destroy this woman and to...
Yeah, but I don't think I believe what he says necessarily. I believe his face, because that's what gives it away, because no one else is seeing that other than the camera, which is us.
Yeah. And it does prove the age-old point that men don't want anything more than the thing that's hard to get. I mean, he does ultimately win her, but he has to spend an entire summer at his aunt's place trying to win her over.
I would do the same for Michelle Pfeiffer.
I'm going to start taking it personally. I don't recall you spending an entire summer wooing me. I wasn't that hard to woo.
The Michelle Pfeiffer and other roles, because she's very good in this movie, but one of the things I don't love about it, actually, it's funny, I like this movie, and yet we're really shitting on it a lot, I think, in this podcast, but I don't love that she's playing this victim, that she's completely used.
Yeah,
and
I agree.
Doesn't have agency, in other words, that's overused.
The fact that she just keels over and dies as soon as her heart is broken.
Her burst left ventricle?
Yeah. They never say that she was sick with anything.
She's just sad.
She's just so sad that she dies, despite being like a healthy, young woman.
And Chevalier comes and tells her that Valmont actually loved you. He's made me tell you his dying words, which is not even untrue. The dying words were to come and tell you that he really did love you, and yet she still does conk out and die. And the interesting thing, too, is that Uma Thurman and Swoosie Kurtz are in the background while he's saying all these things, because they were entwined in this, too. And it's not really Cecile's fault, and it's not Volange's fault, her mother, Swoosie Kurtz. I don't think that Swoosie Kurtz's character knows any of these things that happened. And we also see Keanu in the movie at some point has been with Glenn Close, he's laying in the bed.
And it was very incestuous. And we learned that while he's seducing, coercing Cecile into sleeping with him, he eventually admits to her that he had slept with her mother.
Oh, wait, who's the he here?
Valmont.
Okay.
I can't remember. Maybe it is the Marquise who tells her the story about how, when your mother was young, she had her husband in one room and her lover in the room next door, but then she slept with the third party. It must have been him because he says the third party was me, confessing to her, I slept with your mom. I bagged your mom, lady. And she doesn't really blink an eye.
It's Pornhub.
I know.
A lot of stepmom porn around here.
But this is the
mom
thing
porn.
with aristocrats, too. It's a very small group.
Yeah.
They all know each other. They all gossip about one another. Half of them in the movie are related to one another. And I guess they're all sleeping with each other, too.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so Glenn Close has 3 huge moments in this movie, maybe 4 in fairly limited screen time. The opening scene sets up, well, that's not that big a deal, but it mirrors, and of course she's looking in the mirror, but it mirrors the ending scene, which is why it's so important. We'll talk about the end scene in a second. When Valmont comes in yelling success as he runs up the stairs, and he actually tells her what happened, that he did bed Torvel, there's so many layers going on there because Glenn Close, great actress of course, had to know this was going to happen, or maybe she didn't believe he could do it, maybe that's what it was, but her face falls. We've seen a lot of faces fall in movies before. That's a great face fall, because I guess what it comes down to is she was in love with him, and wait a minute, you can fuck the girl that I wanted you to fuck. You're my tool, you're my device to screw with my cousin's girl, her daughter. Fine, do that. That doesn't mean anything. Be with pros, whores, prostitutes. Fine, do that. That doesn't mean anything. But this means something because I know you actually care about her. Glenn Close, that might be the best moment in the whole film. Everyone talks about the last shot, and it is awesome, but that's right behind it, if not equal to it, when her face falls.
Everything falls apart just because her ego, she's like butthurt that he fell for Madame de Torval, when I think she always believed that they were, even if they weren't a couple, that there was this agreement between the two of them that they were partners in crime. The idea that he might fall in love with one of these women he's sleeping with.
Then you went and cared.
Exactly.
Then you went and screwed it up by doing something stupid like say, I love you. I think I butchered that a little bit. One of the better moments in the whole movie, too, as well, would be the recurring line, and it's set up, first of all, by Marquise when she says, it's beyond my control, quoting someone else, I believe, right? But then that's what Valmont uses over and over again, says that line in so many ways. This is some awesome writing. I love the scene when Glenn Close has all those lines I quoted a few minutes ago, almost in a row. Within context, it makes sense. It's not just, here's a great line, here's a great line, here's a great line. It makes sense. But I wrote all those down, and when I found that scene, trying to find how to pronounce her name, I thought, wow, I didn't recognize these are all in the same scene, because we saw the movie about a week ago. But then he's with Michelle Pfeiffer saying, it's beyond my control, it's beyond my control, but different reasons to say it. That might be the best writing in the whole film. And of course, it's heartbreaking because you side with this woman. Uma Thurman is innocent too, but she also becomes complicit in some ways, despite the fact
she's kind of a jokey character.
But she's a kid, and she's also a sideline character in a lot of ways, a lesser character. Pfeiffer's character really never does anything wrong of her own free will, and this guy's dumping her just because that's part of the game. She's so in love with Valmont, she's cheated on her husband to be with this guy, and he's just so coldly doing this. But of course, again, maybe Malkovich doesn't sell this as well as he could have, but inside of him, every time he says it's beyond my control, that heart breaks a little bit more.
And she doesn't just cheat on her husband, she cheats on her virtue. She is a famously virtuous and moral woman whose whole identity is wrapped up in this idea that she does right and that she's proper. So she's torn apart, maybe even more so, because she's let herself down and she doesn't know who she is anymore. And you could say the same about Valmont. Why does he break up with her? Truly, to be with Glenn Close?
He always wanted Marquise, so yes, I think so.
He's had her before. Perhaps the sex with her is incredible, but he just wants to win. They have a bet, essentially, and he wants victory. But I think he also is so shook by what falling in love with Madame de Torvel says about his identity. He is a playboy, he's a bad boy, he is not attached to anybody, and he is so disturbed by his attachment to her. That's the real reason he breaks up with her. He kind of uses the bet with the Marquise as an excuse to carry it out, but he's like a robot.
He's afraid of his own feelings.
Yeah, but when he's actually breaking up with her, he's just repeating it over and over again, and it's like he's just trying to be as removed as possible. But as you say, his performance says it all, that he is heartbroken.
And I can quote Paul Newman, so 2 years before this, the Best Actor winner, In Color of Money, he says to Tom Cruise, money won is twice as sweet as money earned. That's why he wants, I think, to get with Marquise again, because it's not even so much the sex would be awesome. It probably would be for both of them, because if you could strip away all this shit and they're sitting in therapy back in this era, you have to be honest right now. What do you really want? I want him. I want her. And then they could just fuck on the couch and let the therapist leave and they'd be happy. But because of all this artifice and bullshit, they have to go through all the rest of it. They're saying that in a lot of ways too, especially him, but her too. She admits at one point she really wants him, but not like that. No, because it's got to be this way because I'm evil and you're evil too. But he's also a puppet. I already said Spacey, consenting adults, a couple years after this. I always remember this line. I saw the movie once a long time ago. I think it might be in the trailer. He says about Kevin Kline, he's my puppet. Well, obviously, even though he's a powerful guy in this world, and he set so many things in motion, and as I said already, he's the main character, Malkovich is Glenn Close's puppet.
Absolutely.
And then he walks into getting stabbed by Keanu willingly. He knows what he's doing. He drops his saber, his sword thing. He could have killed Chevalier many times over, but then he walks into getting killed himself. I guess because of the guilt.
Yes, he commits suicide. Suicide by duel.
Terrell dies soon after that, of course, as Chevalier tells her the truth. And then that last great shot. So Marquise removing the makeup. It is a bearing of her soul type of moment. It doesn't last that long. It's a very slow fade to black. I thought maybe it was one of those things where it lasted for a minute and a half. It wasn't that long. But we do see Glenn Close wiping off this ridiculous makeup that they all wore. And then wiping and wiping and wiping. And Glenn Close probably is a normal human being, doesn't have the greatest skin of all time. And you actually see, I think, what you would see when she walked home that night.
But here's a curious detail. Oh, she's taking her mask off. She's taking the makeup off. And she's disgusted. It's this almost like horror moment. In the beginning of the film, the bookend shot, she's looking in the mirror. She's admiring herself. She's not wearing any makeup in that shot. That is her natural skin. And she loves what she sees. The difference is that at the beginning of the movie, she loves what she sees. It's her natural skin with none of her armor on. And then at the end of the film, she's taking her armor off and she hates what she sees. She hates her reflection in the mirror. That's the difference. She's taking her makeup off and it's like this violent thing that she's doing to her face because she's taking it off in this not very gentle way and the lipstick is smearing across her face. It's a great effect. But you can't say we're seeing her true ugly side underneath. We've seen her true ugly side through the whole film. It's more like she's seeing
the true
her
honest
ugly
side.
Yeah.
We're seeing the honesty, yeah. Well, you mentioned Valmont already. Milos Forman made that a year later. Roger Vadim made a French version in 1959, so long before this film came out. And then Cruel Intentions was based on this story. That was a box office hit, even more than this was, pound for pound. And then there was the 8-episode TV show that came out very late last year, which I don't think was all that well received. So I mentioned Glenn Close with 8 nominations and still has never won an Oscar. Could have won for this. She was nominated, I think it was 5 times in the 80s.
And this was great villains, maybe not back-to-back. Was there?
Yeah, they were back-to-back.
Oh, they were, wow.
Fatal Attraction, which we covered
Wow.
last summer. We'd never covered Glenn Close before last year. We did Air Force One earlier in the year, which of course she's a small supporting role, but she's very good as the vice president. I love her as the vice president in that film. And then that great role in Fatal Attraction. Chris and I covered her in The Natural and Scoring at the Movies a few years ago. So now we've covered Glenn Close, I have at least, many times, but you and I hadn't until 2022. Malkovich, 2 nominations in his career, but also he was in Being John Malkovich, obviously. Fun role. As great as that cast is, you can't overlook his performance. Rounders hanging around. Pay that man his money. And then Secretariat. Chris and I covered both Rounders and Secretariat on Scoring at the Movies. Michelle Pfeiffer has been nominated 3 times, including in this movie. I thought it was only once we'd ever covered her before in a smaller role, supporting role in Hairspray, where she plays a villain. So opposite this, she's actually a Marquise type character in that, and a racist. But of course, she's also in Mother in a small role. And we got to cover a movie where she's truly the star one day. We probably should have done Batman Returns last year because, yeah, that's Batman and that's Penguin. But she's the best thing, and I think is a pretty damn good Batman sequel. I've always loved Batman Returns.
She's the only actress who's ever pulled off No, I shouldn't say that. Anne Hathaway was good as Catwoman.
Oh, Pfeiffer is so much better. Pfeiffer's incredible, and that was going to be Annette Bening till she got pregnant with Warren Beatty's baby coming out of them doing Bugsy together and getting married. That would have been Bening, but then Pfeiffer got the role, and she is so fantastic. That's a movie that I think ages better than most superhero movies in that era did because she's so good in that. Keanu, we've covered him a lot of times. Parenthood, Speed, The Matrix, iconic roles. Don't sleep on Parenthood. I love his role in that, especially when he becomes a mentor to the young Joaquin Phoenix. And then Chris and I have covered him lots of times on Scoring the Movies. He was in Point Break and The Replacements and so on. Uma Thurman, got the end credit in this movie, which is funny because when I saw that, I looked up and thought, she must have been acting for a long time or something. And I didn't know she was so young, being 18 years old. But no, she was pretty new. Not the very first thing she ever did, but one of.
She'd been modeling.
Yet it's almost like, we've got Uma Thurman.
Yeah.
But who was Uma Thurman? I don't know. Anyway, the end credit. We've covered her in Pulp Fiction and the Kill Bill movies. Got the nomination, of course, in Pulp Fiction for supporting actress. Swoosie Kurtz was in Slapshot. Don't remember that role, but she was. Chris and I covered that movie long ago on Scoring at the Movies. And she's Jim Carrey's rival in Liar Liar, which of course was a monster hit about 9 years after this. We can't forget, we didn't mention him at all yet, but he is Valmont's assistant, I guess you'd say.
Valet.
Azalan, remember? Peter Capaldi, an Oscar winner. I've been saying all the nominations.
Wait, he's won an Oscar?
He's an Oscar winner for live action short. He won that in 1994.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I did not recognize him at all. But he played Doctor Who.
He's also in The Thick of It on TV, and then In the Loop, which is based on the Thick of It thing from, I think, BBC. That movie, In the Loop, did not make a lot of money, but that's a savage, cool satire of American and British politics.
If you like Veep, you got to watch In the Loop.
That's the inspiration.
Like, Veep is basically In the Loop.
Armando Iannucci made that before he ever did Veep. So Frears, we barely mentioned him, but he was the director. He went on to do The Grifters a couple years later. That got some nominations as well. I think maybe even for him as director. And the funny thing is that in this case, he wasn't nominated, but the movie was. And then in that case, it was the reverse. He was nominated for directing, but the movie wasn't. I Love High Fidelity, and then The Queen, which fits because he's done a lot of biopics in his career, including that one about Queen Elizabeth II.
It's quite a resume. He really does work a lot.
Christopher Hampton won 2 Oscars 22 years apart. So this and then The Father, which we've raved about before. That's a damn good movie. We've not seen a second time. We will see it again one of these days. And then that movie, The Son, the Hugh Jackman movie that came out late last year. That's him too. So we did The Father and then The Son in a couple of years. And he did base it on, let's see, Choderlos de la Coque's book and his own play.
You think if there's any language we wouldn't butcher, it would be French, since we're Canadian and we had to take French classes all through school, and yet we can't even get French.
He said that name during a speech, I think, and I didn't really get it in my brain enough to remember how to say it now. The producer is Norma Heyman, who were thanked many times that night at the Oscars there, and Hank Moonjean. Heyman produced Mary Riley a couple years later, and Moonjean did a lot of Burt Reynolds films. So it's funny they didn't go on to do big things out of this, because I didn't really see a lot of big things after this. Not successful, anyway. The movie's 185-1. We watched our Spotty DVD, which I mostly didn't notice once it got going, but if it's going to be spotty, it's almost always in the opening. I think On Golden Pond was the same thing. The opening credits were just terrible, and then you don't really notice it so much as the movie plays out, but it was a pretty bad-looking DVD. The cinematographer, Philippe Rousselot, he shot Interview with the Vampire, which we covered a few years ago, and won an Oscar several years after this for A River Runs Through It, the Redford film. The editor, Mick Audsley, cut 12 Monkeys, one of my favorites from the 90s, and also edited several films for Frears. Several films for Frears. I actually said that mostly right, but then I decided to butcher it. Sing it again. Several films for Frears. And the composer, George Fenton, was nominated, has 5 nominations, but has never won. Did the music for The Fisher King, and of course, also for Groundhog Day. Appropriate because we record this in the evening on Groundhog Day. So what do you think of the look? I know the DVD was terrible. The editing and the music.
Well, the technicals are pretty immaculate on every level. This is a total big studio film that just gets everything right with a bunch of pros. And the score is spot on. It feels like it could have come right out of that period with a real professional orchestra. It's beautiful orchestra with a real professional orchestra.
We've already recorded a video tonight for one of our YouTube things. We're getting a little punchy maybe. It's been an hour and a half.
Orchestra.
For you, it's almost the middle of the night, too.
I guess we're...
It's almost 9 o'clock at night.
It's my bedtime. I guess we're leaving it in. Yeah, beautiful score.
A human moment. How could I not leave it in?
Yeah, beautiful set. Although I feel like this set was more probably the location managers.
I wonder about that. It won the Oscar for that, and yet it felt like...
You just found the place.
Said Foreman with Valmont the year after this. Well, he did Amadeus. I think that won for its sets.
Probably one of the best costume dramas, certainly
costume,
in the 80s.
Yes,
Yeah.
But they shot in real locations, so it's just taking advantage of what you find in Vienna. Isn't that what it is?
You find a beautiful castle, and maybe you put a bedspread on it or something. I don't know. Don't want to say they didn't do good work, but it is also the tendency of the Oscars to always give awards to the most elaborate costumes, you know? It has to be a period costume. It has to be a dress that took 1,500 hours to make, and then they give it the award. And
that they can barely breathe in.
Of course, with their tits spilling out over the top. It does seem like it's very accurate to the period that is what people really did wear during that point in time in French
funny
history.
in Amadeus, the same thing, because, what's her name? Stanzi, I think is her name, the wife. Her boobs are just almost spilling right out of the thing, but that's just the way they dress. And yet you think about so many eras in the past that are so chaste.
Chaste, yeah.
2 weeks ago we did In the Mood for Love, and partly it's because of the culture, and partly just the way she looked. She didn't need to be spilling out of anything. But in the Mood for Love, Maggie Cheung is always dressed up right to the chin. She looks incredible. Those costumes, I said it, should have won the Oscar going away. Weren't even nominated for the Oscar, even though this won. But here you got the complete opposite, where they're just spilling out of these things. It seems like a wardrobe malfunction is imminent.
But it does prove that modesty is always relative, and people's standards for modesty change over the years. One culture, it could be showing your hair. Another culture, it could be showing your cleavage. It's different with everyone all the time because it's invented.
Okay, then last thoughts on Dangerous Liaisons. Rachel Green's not favorite movie. Her second favorite movie.
Well, yeah, we picked on it a little bit. It's not a perfect film, but it is so...
It was fun, though.
Fun and just delectable. It is a great, compelling film. You can't take your eyes off of it.
I mentioned Succession and how I compared the two. Maybe part of the problem with Succession also is that you don't see the victims, really.
Yeah.
And this movie has got mostly one with Pfeiffer, but in some ways it's also Thurman and Reeves. So you see the two awful villains, one especially in Marquise, but also Valmont. So it isn't about, in some ways, glorying in them. I don't know what I'm trying to say here. It's just I thought so much about that and how I'm stressing out about seeing a show that I know I want to see and I know is well done.
We don't have to watch it, babe.
It's just this guy is Rupert Murdoch in that television show, and I hate that motherfucker. He might be the worst thing that's happened to the world in the last 20 or 30 years because of the way he's manipulated media, all for the sake of money and for his own ego. And that's what the Marquis in this and also Valmont are doing too, just because they can, just because they want to, and fuck everybody else. And when she has her big breakdown, because Close has that big moment, when she breaks down, she finds out that Valmont died. She wouldn't know that he walked into it on purpose because no one would know that but him, I don't think. But that's when Close has her big Oscar moment. And it's a great crying scene. Yeah, and you should feel bad for her, but also, fuck you.
But it's a comeuppance. In Succession, we're still waiting for him to get his comeuppance. He's a miserable person, but he still is not being punished for what he does. In this movie, they're punished.
It is a savage movie. I hadn't seen it in a long time, and I don't think I'll watch it again for a long time, partly because these people are just so loathsome. But that script is great. The actors do a hell of a job. And even though it's very unusual casting, John Malkovich really holds this movie together. He really ties the room together. All right, that's it for Dangerous Liaisons. In 4 days, I will continue the month of crazy, stupid love by talking about an impossible romance deep in the heart of Italy. It's a classic movie love story, William Wyler's Roman Holiday. And in 7 days, we both will put the finishing touches on this month of crazy, stupid love by tackling our first ever Terrence Malick film, partly by request of one of our listeners. It'll be Badlands. We'll see both Martin Sheen and Sissy Spacek for the first time in a very long time. The coming attractions trivia ties into that. We've never covered a Terrence Malick film before, and Sissy Spacek has only come up once. For Martin Sheen, this would be film number 4. What are his other 3, and what is Spacek's lone time being discussed on this channel?
All right, so for the answer to that question, check out next week's podcast about Badlands. You obviously already know how to find us, but let me remind you to favorite or subscribe wherever you listen. If you already followed us as Top 100 Project, nothing will change, including access to our archive of hundreds of episodes that are available for free. We're both on Twitter. I'm at Bev Ellis, and Ryan is at MovieFiend51, or you can reach us by email, haveyoueverseenpodcast@gmail.com. And you can find this podcast plus bonus material on YouTube. We're on YouTube now, so go ahead and find us at, what is it, Ryan?
At HYES Ellis. So have you ever seen Ellis?
And
if you just type that in your browser, then basically it's a web page effectively that takes you to our library of videos, which is going to be, 10 or 12 at this point.
So subscribe to us there, and then you'll be the first to know whenever a new video comes out. And to enjoy freshly roasted premium coffee delivered straight to you in Canada or the US, please go to sparkplug.coffee/HYES and enjoy a 20% discount on us.
Ending this podcast is beyond my control. Wait, no, it's not. Please.
And cut.
And click.